My name is Briell Decker. I escaped the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was trapped there for 8 years. This is how crime works. Warren Jeffs, being the prophet of the FLDS, he had full control. In the public eye, he was one person. In reality, he was a criminal. If Warren Jeffs told somebody to do something, even if it was wrong, they can't really say no. I tried like 10 times to escape before I succeeded. I was born and raised in the FLDS faith. I married Warren Jeffs at 18 years old. Arranged marriages were established because they had polygamy in the church. And they said arranged marriages is the way it works because if you go through the prophet, that's the only way to be pure. I believed everything I was told by my parents. I believed everything I was told by Warren Jeffs even. Warren Jeffs became the prophet in September of 2002. He was also the closest one to God on earth, supposedly. That's why they call him the prophet. When I was little, I wasn't really asked what I want to be when I grow up. It was always like, you're going to be a mother in Zion, stuff like that. Like it was just mapped out, this is how it's going to be. Warren Jeffs called my father. He told him I was ready to get married. And my father was told to take me on a drive. He didn't know who I was going to marry for sure at that time. It could have been any guy in the church. We get up there and Warren Jeffs asked me, who do you believe God wants you to marry? I didn't dare lie to him. I also didn't dare say no to him in the end when he confirmed that it was him because I felt like I was groomed. I also felt like I don't feel like I'm in a position to really have a say. But I also didn't know what I was going into. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff now when I look back on it and being told, which way do you want to jump off? There was really no way to have an easy path. The FLDS women did not really have a say in their marriages. They could refuse, but they were strongly encouraged to say yes because the punishments, could be pretty steep. I had a sister who went into his family 5 years before. I was afraid. I saw how they treated her. She wasn't really high status in his family, really. To reach into his family from where I stood was supposed to be a huge privilege for me. I did not love Warren Jeffs. I was more in the marriage for God. Every marriage was separate at the time when I was growing up. Usually the first wife was the only legal one because that was the only one that could be legal. They had different rooms and they didn't usually combine all that until Warren Jeffs went to Texas. In Warren Jeffs' house in Texas, they had bunk beds in some of the bigger rooms. He had a favorite wife, and he was basically a monogamist. He said God would decide if ever you were worthy to be with him. He did not have a rotation cycle, so there was a chance you would never see him. But for me, I didn't really care about that because I wasn't really attracted to him. When he went to Texas, it had a guard tower and a gate around it. He started to introduce what he was doing as group sessions.
What do you mean by group sessions? You don't have to go into detail, just...
Yeah. Well, he was having orgies. So, yeah. He was bringing underage brides in the room with, adult wives. So, it was a very bad situation. I didn't know at the time I married him he wanted to make me an accomplice. He knew. That part of the story is very hard for me to talk about. The Book of Mormon is one of the main teachings that define the FLDS. The FLDS Church is a branch off of the mainstream Latter-day Saints Church. The F stands for Fundamentalist. In the LDS faith, they interpret the Book of Mormon to have eternal families, and they baptize people in the temples for eternity and stuff. In the FLDS, they believe that everything belongs to God. So they've interpreted the scriptures quite a bit different over the years. And they say that the children belong to the prophet, to God through the prophet. So they actually have paperwork that you sign your children over to the Church of the FLDS, which is not legal paperwork, but they don't all know that. In the early 1900s, the LDS and the FLDS split because of polygamy. If you are just in a monogamous marriage, you'll never see God again. You have to have 3 wives to make it into heaven. FLDS do not like LDS. They think they're following the wrong prophet. So they call them apostates. LDS don't really like FLDS either for the same reason. Before Warren Jeffs became the leader, there was 10,000 followers. I believe that he has at least 5,000 today. Being the prophet of the FLDS, he had full control. He had the titles of their houses in this legal trust called the UEP. So the UEP is United Effort Plan. It's like the land in Colorado City and Hilldale. He had control of who lived in the houses. Because he had the titles, he could decide if he wanted to move somebody, and he had a moving crew that would just show up at your house and say, you're moving today. And he had control of, the food, how much, people were able to, because he didn't let the ladies, especially his ladies, leave their houses. So he would have people bring food to us. So what they brought was what he wanted them to bring, It's like a pyramid in the FLDS. They have the prophet, they have the bishops, they have the fathers, the mothers, children at the bottom. And in Warren Jeffs' family, he had a pyramid also, and it had to do with heritage a lot, according to obedience. When I entered the family, I was number 65. I think he only had 49 children altogether. Family to family, it did vary quite a bit. In Warren Jeffs' family, we lived off donations, so we didn't really work for money. It was a hard balance when you forget how hard it is to earn money. And when you have 79 wives, you can only imagine, For a time, there was Wendell Nelson and Briell Decker, who were the first presidency. And then the bishops over different areas were his brother Isaac, his brother Lyle. He had different people over different areas that were bishops, but it varied quite a bit because he struggled with trusting and feeling like people were going to overpower him someday and become the prophet later. So he would excommunicate bishops and stuff for temporary and sometimes for out of the church. He would just accuse them of crimes and rotate them quite often. There were other reasons also why people were rotated, but that was the main reason, is because of his insecurities. Each person had to prove their loyalty to get into the higher positions. So if they were first presidency, they were pretty loyal to Warren Jeffs and had higher standards. Being a wife did not give you any power and control except for with the community members. If you're with, in my family, they would respect me more while I was part of the FLDS because I was married to Warren Jeffs. Because I knew more. I went straight to the source to find out information. Also, another thing was that if you're married to the prophet, that's the highest a woman can go in the church. I did not get along with everyone there. That was basically impossible with 79 wives. But I did have some friends. People fight, especially in polygamy, the wives, they have the jealousy issue. And it's very hard to keep sweet no matter what, it's very, very hard when it's not fair. And there's never going to be fair. People do fight. They just don't fight like people would without the psychological component. They reach their breaking point. And, they have breakdowns. They end up in hospitals. They end up the same things. But, there's more pressure, so it's going to happen more often. But then they're also denied medical resources a lot in these cults. So it's very hard. Doctrine and Covenants is the one, section 132, talks about polygamy. That was the one that they use in the FLDS. The main duties of the wives were cooking, cleaning, gardening, sewing, teaching school, interacting with the children in between school. When I first married Warren Jeffs, he put me on every chore, every hour. I'd be on gardening for an hour, sewing for an hour. I was running from job to job. And I was so exhausted by the end of the day. I don't really know why he did that. All the rules were strictly enforced, except for more mild ones. You had more leeway. Being late was one of those milder ones, to the kitchen, to your responsibilities. But if you were late because you slept in, it's going to be one of those ones that stack over time. So at first it won't be that big of a deal. But over 10 years, you're going to have more offenses. And there's a chance that the punishments will become greater by the end of the 10 years. Punishments could be psychological as well as physical punishments. Psychological means you can't grow beyond your state. like into heaven. You will never see God again. If you are never highly promoted in the church, you're going to like get deprived of like physical blessings too. Like your house might be more needy, and then you could move out of it when you fix it up and never have a good house. So physical punishments happen that way too. Challenging the prophet was definite excommunication from the church, lose your family. It doesn't mean like, execute them, like death necessarily. It could lead to that, but they would never say, like, if you did die in the church, they usually put it in the name of an accident. Members were definitely expected to tattle. If they saw anything, saw somebody out of line, something bothered them, they were encouraged to talk to Warren Jeffs and tell them about it. The people inside do realize they are being controlled, but they also are taught that they have a choice. They can say no at any time, but they don't know how it is to say no without pressure. It's not really agency. It's not really freedom. At 8 years old, when you're baptized, from that point on, God stops atoning for you. It's all up to obedience. If you disobeyed in the FLDS, then you would never make it to the highest degree of glory in the celestial kingdom, which meant you would never see God again. You had to make it to the very top. One of their doctrines is like, you cannot have relationships with pregnant women. And so Warren Jeffs would take men's wives away, saying like, you disobeyed the doctrine, you disobeyed God, and go and have relationships with the same lady, marry her, have relationships with her while she's pregnant. But he didn't. He was the exception because he's the prophet. The FLDS were not encouraged to interact with the outside world. They had to like go to the stores at times and stuff, but usually it was the men, in Warren Jeffs' family. When I was a younger child, I did get to go to the stores in Sandy with my mother and father, but like we were encouraged to not interact. So a smile or just a compliment about your hair or something meant a lot to me at that time, because when I got in crisis later in life, I felt like, those are the people that care, the people on the outside. Even though I was told my whole life they didn't care, but those compliments and those smiles showed me a different story than what I was being told. He had a lot of control over which books were recommended to read, which books weren't, and over the years that's got stricter and stricter. We had to get rid of the televisions when I was like 9 years old. And then we couldn't have internet basically around the time that Warren Jeffs was caught. I think that was a lot to protect the true stories from getting to the people. We did have telephones. They would just like go in and try to delete the internet option. We also had radio in the cars, but like we weren't supposed to turn it on, they did have some of the basic like computers and stuff, but like they try not to get on the internet. I lived in about 23 houses during the time frame that I was in Warren Jeffs' family. Well, the main locations at the time was South Dakota, Colorado City, and Texas. I did live in Texas the most because it was where I was supposed to be, according to him. Houses in hiding were mainly set up for people that were struggling in the Holy Lands, so like the compounds. So South Dakota, Colorado City, Texas, they were places that for the most obedient people. The houses in hiding were like in between like Hildale and Colorado City and the Holy Lands. And the main reason I think the purpose was so they wouldn't mix with the people in Hildale and Colorado City. But they couldn't stay in Texas because they were struggling. They didn't want to mix in because then all the information that was happening in Texas and those would get more out. When you started to struggle, when he saw the first signs of like questioning or anything, he would move you to another location. And most of the time they were told to just pray and work to be able to be sent back to the Holy Lands. For most of the people, their experience in these houses, I believe, was like cooking and, sewing and just praying. But like for me, when I got there, it was a different experience because I just read and became openly rebellious for 2 years. Usually there was like 7 women in a house and then the caretaker and his family. They weren't allowed to leave the house because they wore the dresses and people could identify them. And also they could escape. Like if they're struggling, he's not going to want them going out and about in the stores and all that kind of stuff. If it's a caretaker over a woman, it was a man. If it's a caretaker over children, it's usually a lady. The man would have his own family there, and they would guard us. Like, we couldn't go outside. They had cameras on us. There was really no exit route. The more you struggled, the more times you tried to escape and didn't successfully escape, the higher security tightens on you. Even a child, like if a child tries to escape and then has to go back legally, they're probably going to have a harder experience when they get back. I ended up in the houses in hiding because I requested to go there. I wrote to Warren Jeffs right after one of those secret group sessions. I only went into one of those. Like, it was basically the introduction to the whole situation. And I wrote to him and I told him I don't really want to, I just need more time. I didn't confront him on his ideas, but I just told him I needed more time. And he bought into my story and let me go to a house in hiding to prepare further. And I became openly rebellious and did not go back until he was caught by the law. Children are raised in the FLDS to be obedient. They believe that by the time they're 3 years old, they should know what obedience is. They're taught, what would Father like? What would Father do in this situation? What would the prophet do in this situation? It's all about, the pyramid. Like the girls, you're going to be a mother in Zion. There were so many different trainings. He had one on almost every topic of life. What to eat, when to eat, if you can have naps during the day, when to go to bed for the women and when to go to bed for the men. When I was a child, we had at least 4 hours a day of sermons. And we had it in the morning when we woke up with our father for an hour. We had it at school when we first got there for an hour with Warren Jeffs. We had it after lunch, history training for an hour, and then at night before we went to bed. And then at Sundays, of course, were more. Education was mostly homeschool for people in Salt Lake area, the FLDS school. But I believe in Colorado City and Hildale, there are a lot of the other children around, even my age, that went to public school for a time. The schools were always controlled by the church to some level. All the bookwork they had, that was printed off old books that they had changed the wording and stuff to make it more churchy. It was all controlled by the church in the name of God. Psychological warfare. I think that was the main thing he used to keep people obedient. Also brainwashing from birth. By the time they're 18 years old, they have really strong, brain cells for the FLDS lifestyle. Children did not learn about the outside world very well, especially if they weren't raised around it. Lost boys is a media term, but it kind of signifies something that is realistic. It's a patriarchal society, so the rules were made stricter for the boys. And also, I think a lot of that is because of competition. They don't have enough girls to go around. Not everybody can have 79 wives. That's just crazy. So they would kick out the boys at young ages for non-compliance. By the time they were 8 years old, they could be kicked out. And there were 8-year-olds that were kicked out. But more often, I think it was more 12 and a little bit more teenage ages. They were seen as a threat because of marriage, because of the polygamy. If they're young and, able-bodied and stuff, that they might be wanted more than the 50-year-olds, the 60-year-old. They're cut off from the family. They get cut out of the pictures. It's pretty traumatic. So it's a miracle I even have any pictures of me when I was younger. Because, I don't have very many, but, I had a few secretly sent to me, but, most of the time they burn all that, they don't have record of it.
What usually happens to them after they're kicked out?
So in those days, it was way harder for them because there was no organizations hardly. They would go to a local place in St. George that had mattresses, and they would open up the back door, and all the boys would sleep on their beds during the night, their packaged beds, that are displays. And they would all jump on those displays in the nighttime, and then they would close up the shop, and then the next morning they'd let them out. And when the activists got more well-known and got more established, the parents would try to bring them straight up to the organizations. Warren Jeffs required of his followers that they donate $1,000 per month per 18-year-old male in the household. So it came from the followers, and it was even at the expense of their credit. A lot of people, when they leave the FLDS, either have no credit, like what I had, because I was his wife. I didn't work for money. Women were not and are not to this day allowed to work. I think it's to keep them isolated, keep them without resources. I think that was a bad thing because like some of the wives had lived off donations for so long, they had no hesitation to ask for money. And for the community members, it was a lot to donate that much money. Like they would go in and say, can I get LASIK today? And can I get like all white filling caps? You know, all these different things. It was very strict. The $1,000 a month was very strict. Like it mattered to them that you donated that. They had some FLDS businesses also, like machine shops. So they just worked like a regular job and would try any way they could to get the money. That was the priority. Warren Jeff spent it lavishly. Like he spent the money on like himself pretty much. And he even denied his family medical care and stuff so he could have more money. When they caught him, they had evidence of like all these pictures. Like he was going to strip clubs, he was getting tons of vehicles and rotating them so that he didn't get caught by the law. He was trying to like trade out his vehicles quite often. He was very like selfish. Like he had tons of money and he was just touring the world with it basically. Nowadays he hides his assets in his members' names. He drained the people of everything and just left it sitting. He was a sociopath. He liked taking away hope and taking away, you know, things slowly. The financial system was part of it to attain his goal, which was to take away their hope antagonizingly and slowly and painfully. Make him isolated, make him lonely. You know, like he just wasn't a good guy. You know, he could have done so many good things with it, but he didn't want to. So you would find these people out in the world, like mainly in the construction field, where the 8-year-olds are driving tractors, like, and they're not getting paid. It's called labor trafficking, but like they bid the jobs really low so that because they're not paying labor, and they're able to get more jobs because of that. You know, they're outbidding everyone else. Like you can come across them. Like the women generally aren't out and about, so it's harder to find them because they dress with the prairie dresses in the FLDS. And if they did come to the stores, you would see them, but it's just more rare. People outside of the community, they don't always know. They just know they got a good bid, you know, for their project until like later after they're on the job. Some people don't care. They think they're good workers. They do a good job, you know. These polygamy families don't have marriages because it's not legal in America to be like married to the same guy. So on their paperwork, it looks like they're single. And so they get more food stamps, they get more all of this stuff, government help. This guy was saying that one sister wife will claim the other sister wife's kids and get like daycare support, in-home childcare. They actually get paid to watch their own kids because they're claiming the other sister wife's kids and this one's claiming this sister wife's kids, so then they get paid to watch their own kids. The main compound was Texas, yearning for Zion Ranch when I was married to him. There were like selected people who went to Texas, and that's how he started to break up families and children even leaving without their parents because he was calling them forward. God called them supposedly to this Holy Land. And if Warren just told somebody to do something, even if it was wrong, they can't really say no. Like they could get kicked out of the church at that point and lose their family and their kids and, you know, everybody. He sent me to a house and hide in Vegas. I didn't really choose that. And eventually I got to where I wrote him a letter and I told him, like, he told us never to talk about the orgy sessions, but I wrote him a letter about, like, I don't want to consummate my marriage in front of everyone. And I never had up until this point, which was a year after. I told him I wasn't going to pray until I wanted to ensure that I didn't, like, go back to Texas before I wanted to. I told him, like, I was going to read, though. I told him I'm not going to pray, but I'm going to read. That was mainly to stop the punishments from, like, stacking and, like, happening to me over and over. I never consummated the marriage. So, like, for me, I went to these houses in hiding, became openly rebellious, and he got caught by the law before I went back to Texas. In mid to late 2000s, investigations began on Warren Jeffs. He was on the 10 most wanted list in America for a while before he was caught. He ran from the law right when he became the prophet. Elisa Wall's case is the one in Utah. Her case was about, like, underage marriage that he had performed before he became the leader The Utah case fell through on a technicality for a short time, and he would have been released had not they had gone into Texas compound and found the records and put him in a Texas prison. In 2008, Texas authorities raided the Yearning for Zion Ranch, and hundreds of children were temporarily removed. And that's where like that story about like, where I wrote that letter and flagged the authorities. In Warren Jeff's version, it helped them find the evidence they needed to go into Texas. His brother, Seth Jeffs, was caught transporting his letters and put on trial for aiding and abetting a fugitive. When that letter got caught by the law and flagged the authorities to go into Texas, he was never going to forgive me. When Warren Jeffs called me, I knew he was angry, to a point that I had never seen him angry at me. He talked to me about, did you write a letter? And I confessed, I told him, yeah, because he already knew, like he figured out, because they had a trial and stuff. And so he already knew they had that letter. I didn't know exactly what it meant. I didn't realize I had flagged authorities, on his case. He didn't explain that to me. I was in survival mode from basically the time that letter was caught. Warren just ran from the law. He required more money of his people. He also didn't want to be in Hilldale or Short Creek very much because the law enforcement was watching that area more than the other newer ones that they didn't know where he was. When the Texas raid happened, I was in South Dakota, and then they were telling me the raid was my fault. Warren Jeff's capture was my fault. They transported us off of the compound because they were afraid of the raid going into Colorado City and South Dakota also. The Texas location played a big role because that's where they got the evidence that put him in prison. That was like the center stake. That was where Warren Jeffs wanted to be most of the time before they went in and they call it an attempted rescue or a raid. But like the law officials went in and found the records and prosecuted Warren Jeffs and put him in prison. There's been children come forward that were molested by him. As mothers, realizing all this, we had not enough power to save them from that because he was the prophet and, he'd done so much stuff already. I had no way of protecting those children. When I talk about the children, I talk about like the underage brides, also the younger kids. He said one time that one of the boys was going after him, that was accusing him of molesting him in the school back in the day when he was the principal. He would give out like excuses and say like, they fabricated evidence is another way of like saying like, it's not real. He had so much at his fingertips to gaslight people, like convince them that their true memories are not real. They had arranged marriages first, then they established underage brides. So like they were commanded to have these wives and have children with them. So it's just so extreme. That's what makes me believe it is a cult. I was so devastated. Like for me, it was still like really heavy and really sad because like, what happened to the children? Nobody was standing up for them. They're all deciding to just go along with it. I would say probably the most misunderstood thing in my experience is that anybody who was over age of 18 is not necessarily an accomplice. In 2011, Warren Jeffs was convicted for sexual assault and sentenced to life and 20 years. The drugs came when I was 23 years old. He started sending nurses and stuff to give me the medicine that the doctors prescribed that I didn't even see the doctor for. It was very, very scary because I didn't know if I was even going to wake up. I didn't know what they were giving me. They told me it was for sleep. It was really for mood stabilizer and sleep, but it was Seroquel. They had cult doctors, so they had doctors that were sent to college to become doctors that were born and raised in the FLDS. So they had degrees and stuff so they could get medication for people. Warren Jeffs never went to college, but he, I believe, demanded control over his family's medications through the doctors, telling the doctors if he wasn't able to prescribe medicine for his family, then he would take away the doctor's family. I didn't have internet. I couldn't check up symptoms. When I'm asking for safety and they want to give me medicine for sleep, I'm like, how am I going to sleep even if I have medicine if I'm not safe? So that was a big wake-up call for me. I didn't really feel like they were following the protocol they would follow with most of their patients. To this day, I still had repercussions from, like, my tongue is like, damaged from the medications they gave me. I've been told now that my caretaker, who's left the church now, he said that Warren Jeffs had me come cold turkey off all of those drugs 2 weeks before my escape. I knew I came cold turkey off, but I thought it was after the escape because I didn't have resources. Warren Jeffs knew that, but he was willing to do that to try to collect the evidence, I believe, to put a guardian over me. But God had other plans. I believe the doctor who had most control over my health lost his family a month after my escape. After I escaped, my father lost his family a week later. My brother who was my caretaker at the time, lost his family a month later. When a person in the FLDS loses their family, there's times when Warren Jeffs will reassign the family to another man or another person in the FLDS that's more qualified to take care of them. But when they lose their family, sometimes it's just a repentance mission. So like there's a temporary time frame when they're not allowed to see their family, and then they maybe can someday come back and see them. My father was told he can never come back to the church. My mother has not been reassigned to this day that I know of. But my father, he's never been able to be with her since, that you even hardly see her for years now. I think he was in prison before I escaped. I tried like 10 times to escape before I succeeded. 10 major times. I had little things, but like every time I got a hold of a phone book or, try to figure out where to go, they would see me, So it was very hard to escape. And I believe when I did escape, it wasn't planned very well. I do have a documentary on HBO Max and Discovery Plus called Prisoner of the Prophet. And it goes into like one of the first attempts that I went off. The police actually had me and everything, but they wanted to put me in a shelter next to the compound. Like it was too close to the compound for comfort for me. I felt like it wasn't like gonna work. And I didn't know how to explain that. It was my first attempt, so I didn't know how to communicate that. But that was one of the attempts, and it goes into great detail on that attempt. But I ended up going to the Utah compound. So that was good for me because there's a mixture of people there. There's ex-FLDS as well as FLDS. So that's actually ultimately where I did escape from. I have a few experiences where I was like trying to coordinate my escape, and they ended up sending me back to Texas for a short time. And there is a picture that was taken in Texas that has like all of his wives, has Warren Jeffs' picture behind him. I'm in that picture because of one of those times that they just transported me back to Texas. I didn't really have a lot of say in that. And now I have testified against Warren Jeffs in federal prison and been told that it's been confirmed that like my whole experience was trafficking across state lines. I escaped on May 23rd of 2012. It wasn't actually in the building of like Warren Jeffs' old house. Like it was in my brother's trailer at the park. I tried to escape that morning and took some main roads and was caught on the roads that FLDS called and told them that I was running away. So they ended up bringing me back. And then later that day, I was in a room. They had put because I had tried to escape, they put 2 screws in the window pane so it would hit the screws. And then the doorknob was turned around so I couldn't unlock it on my side and without the key, which I didn't have a key. So I found some scissors in the room and I unscrewed one side that was really loose. The other side, I just pounded on it until it broke off. And the sister-in-law that was in the house, she came and looked in the window outside and she said, "What are you doing?" She could hear me pounding on it. She came in and took everything I was using. I just found other stuff. She actually called my brother, but he was in a meeting, which I believe was God and myself, but the true God, but when I did break off that screw, they had told me to read earlier that day. So I thought if I open any drawers, they're going to know I left. But if I just climb out the window, they may think I laid down to read. They may not know I have both screws undone. So I climbed out the window and I ran through back roads this time, through the creek, got to a house that was specifically ex-FLDS. And the family I ran to by the end of the day drove me out of town to an activist who picked me up and brought me to her personal location because they were just smaller organizations at that time. They weren't like, they didn't have crisis houses. They had like outreaches. So she took me to her personal home in a neighboring town. The next day, the police officers, who were also FLDS at the time, I couldn't even call 911 in Short Creek because it would get the FLDS police force. I ended up finding an organization that had a family in Nashville that would take me in. And they drove me to Colorado to make sure I wasn't intercepted at the airport because they were hunting for me, like my FLDS family was hunting for me. I just felt like, I need more support than what I'm getting because like they were always concerned that I wasn't eating, my mental health was like kind of out of hand because I wasn't in survival mode. I felt safe. Prior to going to Tennessee, I called the domestic violence shelter in Tennessee and asked them if they would take me on my first case if I needed it, and they said they would. So I ended up like staying there for like 3 months and doing good on some days. Some days I would do bad. It took me about 6 months to have constant clarity. They transported me to another domestic violence shelter that was Christian-based, and I stayed there also for 3 months. I had my first Christmas ever in my life in a domestic violence shelter in Tennessee. It was amazing. But like they had a bunch of donations come. I remember being so overwhelmed that I just kept walking out of the room and coming back in. It was interesting. But like I ended up going a few places in Nashville. I ended up in like a mental health more type facility because I had a lot of resources in that area. It usually takes, they say, about 10 years before you see significant change in the community, in the way people perceive you. Now I've been out 14 years, so I've seen that shift at 10 years about. My name was Lynette Warner before, and I changed it to Briell Decker Blanchard and changed my social security number in America. When I got out of the church, it took me a while to figure out like details, banking. I learned that in Nashville there was some bankers that came into the shelter and gave us some education, and I opened up my first banking account based on that. I remember when I met my husband, I saw the ocean for the first time in my life on our honeymoon in Santa Monica, California. Just stuff like that is so special to me because like I didn't think I'd ever get to. Like when I saw the Statue of Liberty for the first time in my life, it was so special to me because like, I'm a woman in America, that finally gets to experience freedom, and that's what the Statue of Liberty represents, is freedom. My middle name is Liberté, which is French for liberty. When the men leave, they have more skills. They usually have, they've been working for years, and they also get higher paying jobs. But the women, when they leave, they don't know how to survive out here as well. It's just, they might know how to sew. And they don't get paid very much. It's harder to learn how to thrive. I was changing my social, all of that, but they didn't change my SSI in the same month. They qualified me for SSI, but like when they changed my social security number, they were still gonna change my SSI, but they hadn't yet, so I couldn't pay my rent. So I called my attorney in Utah, and I was like, what do? I don't know how to pay my rent. He's like, I don't know how to do that. They're still gonna do it, but I don't know how to speed it up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you that there was this ex-FLDS man who walked in my office and told me that he was kicked out when he was a boy. He was like a lost boy. He grew up, he became a pilot, graduated from pilot school, and walked in his office and gave him some crisis tickets. And he said, if anybody's in crisis, tell them to fly home because Short Creek is changing from FLDS to ex-FLDS. And these crisis tickets were airplane tickets that go on the back of the plane if there's any seats. So I was like, that sounds crazy. But I have to go back to Utah after going through witness protection. It was just crazy. So I ended up in Salt Lake with an ex-FLDS lady. And that is where I found out that I had rights to Warren Jeff's house in Short Creek and went after it for the recovery center. Like it's a mansion. It has like 45 rooms. And I was awarded the house in 2016 on Thanksgiving Day. I applied in February of 2016. And then I went on a hunt. I did free tours of the house and media because it was a high-profile house. I wanted like the dream, which was to build a recovery center. And I found, like with the help of like some Christians that came through on free tours, I was able to locate a worldwide organization called the Dream Center in Phoenix. And they agreed to, do a lease to own, make sure they could get their licensing in Hilldale. That's the first business to get licensing after Warren Jeffs left, And now they've been open for like since 2017, it's been 6 years more, I think. So I had a salary position to do like media for the first 3 years. Today I am a peer support specialist, a case manager, also a residential aide at the Short Creek Dream Center. The majority are like victims of something, but like we do prioritize people from the like FLDS or ex-FLDS, but and also other polygamy groups. There's a lot of gaps in this area. Like we need senior citizen nonprofit. The elderly can't always get out right now because ours has stairs. We don't have elevators. Also daycare in the town that we have is a big gap because like if we had a daycare, then we could more adequately help the single moms. I do not think the church ended when Warren Jeffs went to prison. He is the prophet of the FLDS church until he dies. So that's how their doctrine is. God would kill the leader before he'd allow him to lead the people astray. He's in prison for life and 20 years for a reason, but he still is leading the FLDS from prison. I think it'd be worse if he hadn't been arrested. I believe him being alive in prison has helped a lot more people wake up than just starting over with a new leader immediately with his execution. The FLDS is usually linked to Warren Jeffs, but there are possibility that they could call themselves FLDS without being Warren Jeffs their prophet, because it's just a branch off the LDS church. So they have doctrines that they highlight in their over the pulpit even that are dangerous for children, especially like underage brides. They have doctrines in their faith about racism. The Mormons, like the LDS, Latter-day Saints people have taken it out. Like after several years, they had a prophet that said, now is the time to accept everyone. So they have less racism in the Latter-day Saints faith. But in the polygamy groups, there's like 23 polygamy groups. I don't know of one that has changed the original doctrine to be accept race, like any race, into their church. And it's really hard to figure out a way to incorporate a new belief once, because it would be like denouncing their prophets of the past if they say that doctrine was not true. So they have to figure out a creative way to incorporate like modern day into their faith. So it's really complicated to change the doctrine. So when they put underage brides in the FLDS faith, they can't take it out very easy. So if they're following FLDS necessarily, it doesn't mean they're following Warren Jeffs, because that's just a branch off of the Latter-day Saints. But if they are following Warren Jeffs, most likely they have arranged marriages, also underage brides marriages. So they're going to need investigated. The main thing is underage brides in the FLDS. There are other things, like I know in like the AUB and the Kingston group, it's been more about like Jesus is our elder brother, because in the Mormon faith, Jesus is our elder brother instead of like an all-powerful being in the Joseph Smith teachings. But in the FLDS, they do have that, but not over the pulpit so much. So still a problem. So there are criminal activities, because that could damage all the children. If you marry to intermarrying, they can get like handicapped more easily. And then underage brides is also like, trapping the children into a cycle where they have children. It's illegal to do that, but they have children when they get old enough to realize they're kind of trapped in a cycle. They have to feed their kids and also like escape somehow with their kids. It's a way bigger job when they have children at 13, you know what I mean? So it's definitely illegal. So there are reasons why it's illegal too, because we want to protect instead of like take away people's freedom based on what our country's made for, freedom, you know what I mean? Freedom of religion, especially, we have to watch those lines, why they're there, and keep it safe, this country safe. Polygamy in general in Utah is an infraction now, where everywhere else in America it's a felony. I don't think it's going to end. I think there's just going to be more polygamy groups over time.
Hi, I'm a producer on How Crime Works. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment below with more ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in this series.